Back now here on In Focus on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. Let's get reaction now from the South African National Editors Forum. They've written a statement. They note with disgust, they say, the serving of summons on News 24's specialist legal writer Karyn Maughan. Sanef says the summons served by former President Jacob Zuma's legal team is a clear case of intimidation solely intended to silence Maughan. For more on this, we're joined now by Sanef Chairperson Sbu Ngalwa. Sbu, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. So you've heard there Mr. Maughan saying, in fact, he's quite perplexed by the position that you're taking because you seemingly are protecting a certain sector or a certain organization to say they have a privilege of getting information way before other publications are able to get it.
Good evening to you, Thabo, and to the viewers. Thank you for the opportunity. Obviously, Mr. Maughan is misleading the public, and I think it's part of the strategy by Jacob Zuma's, the former president's legal team in this regard. I think, Thabo, for the benefit of the viewers, if you will allow me, I think let's unpack what happened in this particular case, because Mr. Maughan has deliberately misled the public in this case. Yeah. What had happened here, Thabo, is that Brigadier Mdudjwa of the SANDF wrote a letter, and this letter, he wrote it to the correctional services to say that the former president had suffered an injury in November 2020 and therefore would require 6 months to recover. This letter was included in the court papers. Court papers are part of a public record. Any journalist who covers court, even a junior, even an intern, would tell you that journalists have access to court papers. In fact, members of the public have access to court papers. So President Zuma's medical records were not included in that pack. It is actually, for lack of a better word, it's actually a lie to say that his medical records were published. So all that Karyn Maughan did was to write a story based on that, the fact that in the court records there is a letter from Brigadier Mdudjwa, which the team, President Zuma's team or correctional services had used to prove that he was not well to be important, perhaps to help them in their case for a medical parole. So obviously, I think the strategy here, Thabo, was revealed by Mr. Maughan, because it looks like Karyn is being made collateral damage because they are targeting the prosecutor here, Billy Downer. So then using Karyn Maughan as part of their strategy. And I think that is where Sanef comes in and say, this is an abuse and intimidation of a journalist, but also it has broader implications, not just for Karyn Maughan, but for other journalists out there, because it means that if you cover court, as journalists are doing as part of their role and their duty to inform the public, you can be dragged to court by a litigious applicant, as the former president is in this particular case.
Yeah. So it seems to be leaning on the contravention of Section 41, subsection C of the NPA Act, saying in an affidavit, I think he mentions Breitenbach. I'm not clear on those details. I would still need to verify them myself. But it seems this is what he's saying, that particular affidavit clearly states that Karyn Maughan was given this particular record. And the very fact that she had possession of this medical record in itself, even before it would have been published or not, would have been the breaking of the law.
I think, Thabo, we should be clear not to repeat what Mr. Maughan had said, because there was no medical records that were given to anybody. This is a letter which was part of a public record. Let me make an example, Thabo. Remember that in January, February 2020, there was a warrant of arrest that was issued against the former president, but was stayed by the court when he could not appear. And in that case, Thabo, his medical team, in fact, his lawyers, submitted a letter from his medical team saying that the former president had been unwell and had been in Cuba. Do you remember that case?
Yes.
Now, in that particular case, that letter that was submitted in 2020 to support the fact that the former president had not been well was used in a court, and everyone reported about that fact, and they didn't bring a case against anyone because they knew, even at that time, that it's not unusual. So in this particular case, there is absolutely nothing wrong with anyone, because remember, in a court case, and where a presiding officer or the parties involved feel that certain information is classified, a judge can actually seal that. It happens every day. So had the team of the former president felt that there was confidential information, I don't know what is confidential by a medical officer from the SANDF saying that someone has suffered a traumatic injury. A traumatic injury can be anything. It doesn't reveal anything. Safe to say that it would support their case to say that he had not been well. So, Thabo, all of this I am saying to prove that, to actually explain our position as Sanef, because you can clearly see anybody who understands legal process, just the basics of legal processes, can see that this is clear manipulation and intimidation of a journalist. Remember, Thabo, the former president went to court, in fact, went to the NPA to ask the NPA to prosecute Advocate Downer and Karyn Maughan. But the NPA felt there was not reasonable prospects of success, as they do every other time, and then refused to prosecute. Anyone else would ordinarily leave it at that, because there are no prospects of success. But to go as far as a private prosecution, which means that the former president will actually fund the hiring of the lawyers and also be able to carry the cost of that trial. Now, this is the very same person who is publicly asking members of the public to contribute towards this cause. So you ask yourself, what is this that could have been so much of a crime that the journalist would have committed by merely reporting what is in a public record? Well, I believe and we believe that this is not about Karyn Maughan, but this is about the Advocate Downer, and the fact that as you would know, that the former president's team had tried to get him to be removed from the case and failed. This is part of an ongoing strategy. But to abuse a journalist in so doing, that is where we come in as Sanef. That is where our interest lies, because this means that any other journalist would be intimidated going forward.
Explain this part of your statement. You're disheartened to note a tweet made by Zuma's daughter, Dudu Zuma Sambutla, which appears to incite violence against Karyn Maughan. Please explain that.
So there is a tweet this afternoon, Thabo, where the former president's daughter, Dudu Zuma, actually she tagged Karyn Maughan in a tweet, and also had a screen grab of a tweet that said that journalists in Sri Lanka or one of the Asian countries were being attacked for lying or spreading untruths. Literally, actually mirroring that, or actually using this situation to allege that Karyn Maughan had lied, and therefore, that's our interpretation, and therefore should be attacked, because there's no other reason why she would tag a Karyn Maughan to a tweet that says that journalists who lie are being attacked elsewhere. It's a clear incitement of violence and intimidation. And it's in line with actually our sentiment in that statement, that this is intended to intimidate Karyn Maughan and journalists in this country. It's actually a direct attack on media freedom.
You've done a vast inquiry also on ethics and standards and professionalism within the sector as Sanef. And there are certain reforms that you yourself has committed to being the industry standards going forward. Yet we are continuing to see particularly this antagonistic relationship that exists between certain politicians and certain journalists in particular that they are targeting. How do you plan to deal with that?
Look, I think about the thing here is that there have been a number of attacks and a growing number of attacks against journalists recently. And I think that politicians are doing this deliberately, because obviously journalists are the one who expose the corruptions and the wrongdoing by the very politicians. You saw even in the case of the U.S., where the former President Trump would talk of fake journalists and fake journalism whenever the spotlight was on him. Obviously, politicians in this country are no different. But I think members of the public should be able to distinguish between what is real and also what is part of a propaganda to discredit the entire media industry. This is not to say that journalists and the media has not made mistakes. We have actually documented those. We've actually even gone as far as Sanef to institute an inquiry that was presided over by a retired judge, which was about us introspecting. So it's not to say there are no mistakes, but let no member of the public be fooled into thinking that politicians are clean and that the enemy here is the media. It is the media that is exposing those untruths. That is why even today, when we talk about the story of Babita Deokaran, it is actually the meticulous work and the hard work of journalists like Jeff Weeks of News 24, who has actually, through his reporting, it's only then that we saw the Gauteng Department of Health acting against the corruption-accused CEO of Tembisa Hospital, when it has been over a year since Babita Deokaran had died, but they had done nothing about it. So the work of journalists is important to ensure the longevity, but also the protection of our democracy. That's what we should guard against. Members of the public should realize that actually journalists are on their side.
Yeah. Will you, as Sanef, be playing any part at all in this matter of private prosecution that has been brought about by a former president on a journalist of News 24?
Certainly, Thabo, we have to, because we do not believe that this is about Karyn Maughan. This is about journalists and journalism in this country. This is an attack on press freedom. And as Sanef, we are concerned about that. Because as I'm saying to you, if you are a small, let's say you are a reporter sitting in a godforsaken town, I won't call any names unless I offend anyone, it then means that actually the intimidation here is that you can sit there and feel that I cannot report on this particular case involving this particular person because I fear that it might trigger them to, because they've got access to funds and they have money, they can actually institute a private prosecution. So that is the principle we are fighting. So we will be consulting with our legal team to discuss how we can get involved. Ideally, as a layman, I'm thinking that perhaps we can get involved as an amicus in this particular case, as a friend of the court, to object to this private prosecution because it actually assaults the fundamentals of press freedom.
Now, I mean, the details, of course, are still sketchy for me at this particular point, but there are reports of another journalist who is seemingly also going to be facing some court action because of a writer, I think he's a journalist of the City Press, who wrote about the Prime Minister of the Zulu Kingdom, who's seemingly also going to be challenged. Do you think this is going to be now a trend? And as Sanef, are you going to be responding to that?
I must say, Thabo, we saw that statement only this afternoon, and we will be formally responding to that statement issued by the IFP. Again, this is another case of intimidation and intolerance by the Inkatha Freedom Party. Any member of the public and any politician, especially politicians, are not above criticism. If the IFP is unhappy about the reporting and the columns and the opinions of the editor of the City Press, one would expect that there are forums that are available. If what Mr. Makanya is saying is so offensive to the IFP, to the fact that they feel that it violates every rule in the journalism ethics book, there are avenues that are available, Tab. There is the press ombuds, there is the press council, there is an appeal. If they are not happy with the ombuds, there is actually a press an appeals panel which is led by a retired judge. So it's not that there are no avenues, but to actually call on their members to gather and to march to the City Press's offices is no different to what the ANC a few years ago during the time of the Spear did when they shouted, "Don't buy City Press, don't buy," which was condemned by all peace-loving people and all members of civil society who understand the crucial role of the media. And this is not to say that any journalist or the editor of the City Press's writing is right or wrong, but it is actually the principle that if you are, does this now mean that any political party, if they are unhappy with particular certain reporting, they must mobilize their members? We come from a violent past in this country, where the history of violence and the parties that had been at the center of that was the IFP and the ANC. So that's why we feel that this is an act of intimidation. And it has happened in this country where members have been mobilized to either attack certain journalists or communities have been mobilized. So it is actually quite discouraging. In fact, it was quite disappointing, I must say, that the IFP has gone to this extent as to mobilize their members to march to the offices of the City Press I know that that match is scheduled for next week. I hope that sanity will prevail and that someone in the IFP or the leadership of the IFP would actually realize the folly of their ways.
Sbu Ngalwa, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. That's the chairperson there of Sanef, responding to a number of issues that have got to do with journalists at loggerheads with politicians, it seems. And one being, of course, the private prosecution matter that has been brought on by former President Jacob Zuma against journalist Karyn Maughan, and Monji Makanya looking to be going head-on with the Inkatha Freedom Party in that march there that Sanef is talking about. They are set, of course, to still issue a statement on that.